Hey guys, welcome back to Multiply Series 6. Last week in Evolve we were speaking about creation. We were talking about Genesis 1 and 2 and exploring this amazing world that God has made. Now last week you guys couldn't wait to start talking about Adam and Eve and all the things that are going to take place, and that's where we're going this week. This week we're looking at the fall, and that begins in Genesis 3. So to begin with, grab a Bible, turn to Genesis 3, and let's dig into what God's got to say this morning. Brilliant. Now that we've had a wee chat about Genesis 3, let's start to hone in on some things that stand out. First thing is the character of Satan. This is the first time I've ever been introduced to Satan in the story, and straight away we start to see what he's like. You know, the Bible calls him a deceiver, okay? And he comes in all different ways. We see he doesn't come with a pitchfork and horns, he comes as a snake. So often as he comes with a method of deception. Okay, the second thing he does with Eve is he talks about this apple opening her eyes and letting her become like God. Okay, that's a complete lie. He always makes false promises, but that's his tactics. His tactics is lies. Okay, he's actually called the master of lies. And lastly, these lies, the way they always look like he's trying to offer you something that's better than you've already got, or better than what God's offering, but it's always a false promise, and it's always going to lead us into a place of destruction. Okay, so now let's take a look at Adam and Eve's response when Satan comes. Let's remember, we've just read Genesis 1 and 2. Adam and Eve have experienced this perfect world, this perfect relationship. God's never let them down, they have nothing to doubt him on. Yet Satan comes along and for the first time questions, or gives the question to them, is God right in what he says? Do we really believe the word that God has given them, that they shouldn't eat the tree? Okay, that is so often our response when it comes to sin. Is so often the enemy will always ask us, is God right? And poses that question, do we trust him? So Adam and Eve, they've distrusted him, and then he goes on to say that yeah, they'll become like God. So what was their driving force? Their driving force was that actually they don't want to be dependent on God, they want to be like God. God's created us in such a way that we are dependent on him because he's much bigger than us. That's okay. But Adam and Eve fell into the devil's trap of suggesting they should or could be like God, that they would be entitled to that. That's something that, yeah, we see so often in sin. And if you look at almost every sin you do, we know what God wants us to do because we've got our Bibles. We hear his word and his command, and we make a choice that we're not going to go with that, but we're going to go and do our own thing, just like we want to be like God. So what were then the consequences of sin? In Genesis 3, it's the first time sin ever enters the world. And you know, the consequences are huge because we feel them today. Every day we live, we see pain, we see depression, and we see all kind of things that we know God did not plan for this world. But what did it look like for Adam and Eve in Genesis 3? Well, it looked like, firstly, a breakdown in their relationship. Eve starts to blame Adam. Adam starts to blame Eve, and and then they start to hide from God. Their relationship is in tatters. They feel shame for the first time, and actually, what sin does is it brings a curse. And what we read about in Genesis 3 is actually referred to as the curse. Things like God makes childbirth painful. The serpent has to crawl on his belly. Yeah, he had legs originally, but he's cursed and then he's on his belly. The world gets cursed, so as mankind, we have to strive and work comes really difficult. Back then it was like thorns in the ground, but for us, it's probably our schoolwork is hard. But Adam and Eve were even banished from the garden. It was such a tragedy what happened, and it continues till today. So the consequences of sin are always destruction and never good. Unfortunately, as we continue to read through Genesis, things go from bad to worse. from Genesis 3 till 11, all we see is sin taking over, and we're introduced very soon to Cain and Abel, Adam and Eve's offspring, and we witness our first murder that comes through jealousy, and then skip on to later on in Genesis we find that the world is in such a bad place that God actually decides he has to destroy it, and he chooses to do it through a flood. It says that us, who are meant to be reflecting God's image to the world, we had nothing but evil desire in our hearts, and everything we did was evil, apart from one man called Noah, which we know about with Noah's Ark. Things aren't all bad, however. If we were to just see Genesis stop at chapter 11 and that was the end of the story and God just gave up on mankind, who could blame him? But that's not what happens. What we're going to find out as we continue this journey is that even in Genesis we see God make covenants with people like Noah, and we're going to hear about Abraham's covenant next week, but what it shows is God's master plan, and that he wants to restore this world and get it back to how he planned it in Genesis. And we're just at the beginning of the story. We're going to hear more and more about it, but what to take is from this is God has a good plan and a good future and a good purpose, and we are part of that restoration story that we're about to embark on.